start. So I'm here with, how do you say your last name?
Heinzen. So it kind of sounds
Heinzen.
like the ketchup a little bit with just a little bit to the end.
I'm here with William Ketchup. No, William Heinzen. Sorry.
You
Um,
got it.
and so tell us, basically, for people who don't know who you are, tell us about, basically what books you're the author of and what genre you write.
Sure, sure. No, thanks for the introduction. Like I said, the name is William Heinzen. I write epic fantasy. I've got two books out so far. The first book is called Warrior of Light. I've got, here we go. Got a copy of it right here. There we go, Warrior of Light. And it's a very much a medieval fantasy adventure. I kind of describe the premise to new writers who maybe haven't read it as imagine a fictional fantasy world like Middle Earth, right? And obviously this book doesn't take place in Middle Earth. That's just a frame of reference I use. But I say, imagine what that world would be like if Sauron had won the War of the Ring rather than lost. And that's kind of where this book starts out, is actually a group of refugees lost a war against a dark sorcerer, and it's about where their story goes from there. A lot of magic, battles, monsters. And then I actually just published the sequel. It just came out in February, and that is called City of Darkness. Each of these are standalone fantasy novels. They work with a beginning, middle, and an end, but they feature the same characters, and one picks up where the other left off, and just takes the characters on a new adventure. But I grew up reading epic fantasy. Tolkien is considered the hallmark, but I read a lot of writers like Tad Williams, Robert Jordan, David Eddings, and that was what I was passionate about reading. So that's what I decided to start writing. And then I guess back over to you, Jordan. Tell us a little bit about what you write.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of write two different genres, which is interesting. I do like basically realistic fiction, and that's, like thriller, Southern noir type, mystery type stories. The current project I'm working on now, which is titled Gone Before the Storm, is actually, it's, of course, thriller, Southern noir, and there's even a bit of like a family dynamic into it. I haven't revealed what it's about yet. I'm still keeping that a secret, but as far as, how I got started, like you said, read a lot of fantasy. I read books that I enjoy writing as well. So and also I'm also a big movie and TV guy. So I think that had a lot of influence on this, on the way I write and the stories I write. I unfortunately don't have a copy of my book due to it is not published yet.
It'll be there
So
soon.
yeah, hopefully. But so yeah, that's probably how I got started. So when did you like? Was it when you were a kid that you said like, "Oh, I have an knack for writing," or like, where were you? When was it that you started?
Yeah, the first story I ever wrote, I was in third grade, and I wanted to start writing very young. I obviously did so with varying degrees of success in those early years, but the first book I ever wrote, and it was probably really like maybe like a I don't know a 15-page story or something, but I called it Detectives in Dinosaur Times. I think that was around the time when Jurassic Park came out as a movie, was when I was in third grade, kind of in the mid '90s, and I also read a lot of the Hardy Boys, and so I think I like merged those two things together, and I said, what if you had detectives but dinosaurs? And they like the premise of it is these detectives get caught up in a time machine, and it takes them back to the time of the dinosaurs. It's absolutely horrible, of course. It was written by a third grader, but it's a lot of fun to read now. And so I kind of delved into writing on and off ever since then. Right, I actually wrote a very early draft of Warrior of Light, which doesn't really resemble the one that's published here by any extent of the imagination. I wrote that in ninth grade, and then I wrote some other stuff later on in high school. But then in college, flash forward to the end of my senior year of college, I was graduating from a small school in North Dakota called the University of Jamestown, and that was my final senior project for my English major. I said, I want to take this book that I wrote back when I was in high school, and I want to rewrite it, and I would like to eventually publish it. So that was really when I probably really got serious about it, was toward the end of college. But it's something I did on and off throughout the course of my throughout really throughout the course ever since I was a kid. On your end, when did you start? When did you start writing? What got you into it? What were some of your early works?
Yeah, I think I was a big back in middle school. I think when I was like 12 or 13, I was a weird kid, so I was a big believer in that 2012 apocalypse type thing.
Yeah.
And I had seen the movie with John Cusack and a bunch of other people, the disaster movie. With
Yep. Fun
I
flick.
really liked that. So one day I had some extra time in class and I wrote a story called Love in 2012. It was like a two paragraph, and like yours, of course it was horrible. It was about just some couple that gets killed by a giant wave. So, and then from then on, I wrote a bunch of two paragraph short stories, and kind of people liked them. I let some of my teachers read and some of my friends, and they said, I think, if you work at it, you might have a real act for this. And so, but as far as high school goes, I didn't do much fiction writing in high school. I was on the school newspaper. I was the editor, so I still did some writing in general.
Sure.
But it wasn't until high school ended and I, got my first, job, and I'm just working. Not really. I didn't go to college. Still not in college or anything like that. But I decided, I'm gonna sit down and actually write an actual novel, which actually isn't the novel I'm working on now. I started writing a detective novel similar to the HBO show True Detective, which I'm a huge fan of.
Right. That's okay. That's what I was starting to think actually along those lines. That's good stuff.
Yeah. So it was, detective, Louisiana, boy goes missing, and it was, a great story. I still want to finish it till this day. And I was in the third draft of that when I just had this idea about, Gone Before the Storm, and I wrote the first paragraph, and I talked to my editor and she loved the idea. So we kind of been running with that for the past few months. So yeah, I started probably all the way since I was 12 years old. I knew I was never good at sports or anything else. Writing was always the thing I was best at. So
Same here. I was not well versed in the athletic endeavors that my classmates involved themselves in. I've actually got, so I'll tell you a funny story about 2012, right? So the day that the world was supposed to end, shoot, was that December 4th? Was that the day it was supposed to end? What do you remember what the day was?
December 21st, 2000.
December 21st. Okay. So yes, so I live in North Dakota. My parents, I'm not from Alabama, but my parents winter down in Alabama. And so my brother and I were making a road trip down there for Christmas, December 2012, and the day we were leaving North Dakota was December 21st. And I knew that for Christmas, that was the day that the world was supposed to end. Right now, I won't say that I thought the world was going to end. If I was a betting man, I would have definitely bet on the world being there the next day. But you never know. So I remember, and again, North Dakota is very rural. I should clarify. I'm definitely from like a hunting family, so I own a couple of firearms. One of which is a 12 gauge shotgun, which I use for hunting pheasants and waterfowl. But because there was a small possibility that the world would end on December 21st, 2012, when my brother and I began road tripping down to Alabama, I brought my 12 gauge shotgun just in case. Good news is there weren't because I remember I believe the Mayans thought that celestial monsters were going to fall from the sky. I believe that was one of the things that was going to happen. You probably know better than I, but I was like, I don't think this is going to happen. But if celestial monsters start falling or zombies start rising, I've got a shotgun with me. So that was the 2012 or the 2012 apocalypse for me. That was how it shook out.
I don't know. Being a fan of The Walking Dead, I was ready for zombies to just start coming out. I was excited about it.
Absolutely, I was ready for it too. I feel like Rick Grimes before Rick Grimes was a thing, man.
So, and now I think we actually on Instagram we talked about this before, the process that we have for writing. what exactly is your, process when it comes to your books or short stories?
Yeah, so absolutely. I'm actually it's very, how do I call it, like an iterative process, because each book I've worked on, I've actually modified my approach just a little based on lessons learned from my previous work. But the very first book I wrote was completely, I completely outlined the whole thing more or less from start to finish before I started writing. Actually, I think I started writing it. I wrote a couple of chapters, and then I knew that it wasn't going to go anywhere unless I sat down and got down to brass tacks and said, "This is what's going to happen next. This is what's going to happen next." So I wrote that outline, and then I wrote the story based on the outline. So it's very heavily based on outlining. And for me, everyone's mind works in different ways, but for me, that kind of analytical process, I don't know that I would have been able to finish the book without doing that. I feel like that outline was very helpful for me. But the other kind of the other piece of writing is there's what you call outlining, and then there's what you call discovery writing, which is really kind of just making it up as you go. A good example of a person that would call themselves as a discovery writer is like a Stephen King or like a Lee Child, and that kind of organic nature of fiction also lends it a lot to the story to developing as you go, and maybe helping it evolve in more natural ways to where it feels less forced. So I think each approach has benefits. The analytical outlining approach definitely gets someone in the mindset of constructing a plot and filling it in. But the pitfalls, right, is sometimes forcing something to fit into a pre-established plot ahead of time might make the story feel a little forced. I think candidly, I think that folks who watched Game of Thrones, for example, probably saw that a little bit with the last season. The writers had known there was this outline that George R. R. Martin had slayed out for them, but based on how the story had evolved up to that point, conforming to that outline was kind of like putting a round peg in a square hole, for example. So there's advantages to outline, but there's also pitfalls. Same thing with discovery writing. The great advantage, because it allows the story to grow more organically, but also you run the risk of kind of losing steam. Again, to take another popular fiction example, Lost would be a really good example of that. I think Lost and Game of Thrones can each be examples of the pitfalls of both methods, as well as potentially the advantages too. Lost had a very strong start, but I don't think they did a great job pulling the plot threads together at the end, and that might have benefited potentially from a more concrete outline. So I've digressed a little bit, but I wanted to kind of set the stage for what the methods are. So the second book that I wrote, I believe that I outlined it in about thirds at a time, and then filled in the outline as I went. And that's fairly similar to what I'm also doing for I'm now working on my third book. But the next thing that I've changed is I used to draft for both my first and second book. I would draft a book all the way through, based on the outline. And again, the second book was outlined, let's call it, a little more organically than the first, because I didn't do it all at once. But I essentially drafted it. So I would draft a third, then outline the next chunk, draft that. So I had a completed product. I would do that without doing any revisions. So I would have a very rough draft, and I expected it to be rough. And then I would go through and I would revise it, and I would revise it again and again, and then I would work with an editor to revise it. And I probably ended up having, in each case, probably about 7 drafts before the finished product. Well, what I noticed, especially in the second book, I noticed that toward the end of writing the first draft, I actually started to experience some real burnout with the story, in terms of the process of just sitting down and creating the story, even though I essentially knew it was going to happen. It really became a chore, because I've been drafting for so long, and I actually had to do some things to change it up. Like I tried dictating parts of it, going for walks and things like that. But then the same thing happened. Then I would switch to editing. I was very fresh. I jumped into the editing, and I felt very fresh at the beginning of editing. But by the end of editing that book, especially after the third and fourth draft, it was just editing overload. So what I have been trying for my third book is I've actually been probably writing about 1,000 to 2,000 words at a time, based off of I've got a small section of the novel outlined. So I'll write these very small sections, and then I'll usually begin my next writing session by revising whatever I wrote in the previous session. And so I found that what I would call my first draft for this new book is a much cleaner draft. But what I'm finding that I'm liking about it, and I don't think this would have worked for my first book, because if I hadn't sit down and plowed all the way through it, it probably never would have been finished. But for this book, now that I've got a little bit of the psychological confidence in myself, the knowledge that I feel like I know I can finish this one because I've done it before. I'm not worried about spinning my wheels, so to speak. I feel that changing it up much more shorter is I'm excited to draft, and then I'm excited to edit, and then I'm excited to draft again. So it keeps me. I feel that it keeps me much more engaged. It's resulting in a much more polished work, and it's allowing me to focus more on the fundamentals of how do I construct a scene, for example, or how do I get this section of dialogue this right. And to be candid, my manuscripts run around 200,000 words. When you're trying to climb that whole cliff of 200,000 words, admittedly, I probably found early on that I was cutting corners when editing, because you just want to get through it. And I think working with a professional editor, which I did, helped save me from the fact that I was cutting corners, but I was cutting corners, and I feel that I'm doing less of that now. So, very long response. So I apologize for the length of that response. But I'm curious if you'd be willing to share similarly some of the processes that you follow.
Um, yeah, as far as, outlining, I don't suggest any writers do this, but I don't do the outline. Like, I don't outline chapters at all. I start on page one and go from there. But what I do find that helps is knowing the beginning and the ending, of course.
Hmm.
Like, I'll never start a story unless I know how it ends, which my current novel being a special case, I did write like the first paragraph, but I didn't continue until I knew how it was going to end. So that way it's all about just in between putting that information, in there and letting the story and the characters basically tell it themselves. Um, and as far as, I try to write at least, similar to you, 1,000 to 2,000 words, a day. And I'll reread right after I finish writing it, take stuff out, put stuff in. And then, I don't send each chapter to my editor, but once I hit about 25,000, I'll send it back, fix it. And then maybe, right now I'm planning on adding another 15,000 probably, and then sending it to her and just do that process basically until, the book's finished. Because this is technically only I'm in the first draft, but a very carefully done first draft.
Right.
So, which I've improved from, because I remember, with the detective novel, I was sending her the whole book at once, and it just, what the second draft felt like more of the first draft. So I say I was in the third draft, but it was probably more like, the second, to be honest. So yeah, I try to, which I think is Stephen King's method, 1,000 words a day or something. I learned that from him. So I basically that's pretty much my process, and I try to follow that thoroughly as much as I can. But it is, life kind of, it's hard to juggle life and writing at the same time, which actually leads to, my next question. Now, are you a full-time writer, or you have a career on the side?
Absolutely not. That's a good way of putting it. Have a career on the side, because normally folks would ask, do you have a career and you're right on the side? But I like that perspective, right? But no, candidly, my day job, let's call it my day job, that's absolutely what pays the bills. It would be the idea of being able to write full time is certainly appealing. That's a very big mountain to climb. I'm climbing it one step at a time. But no, I live in Mandan, North Dakota, very, very small North Dakota town just outside of Bismarck, which is a little bit larger. It's the state capital. But I work for a technology company out here, and I work on their cybersecurity team, and that's what puts on the food on the table, more so than the books I write. Um, it's a good career. I'm passionate about it, but I'm also passionate about writing. So those are kind of the two components to my day. I work the day job from 8 to 5, so to speak, and then I come home and I try to get my writing in, and maybe one or two episodes of Walking Dead too.
Yeah, I know. I definitely know what you mean. Like, I don't write full time, of course, either. I'm not in, in school or anything like most people my age probably are. But I do have like a full time job. I'm a department manager at a grocery store, which not the most exciting, but like you puts food on the table, pays the bills, and climbing that full time writer one step at a time. So how do you juggle the two? Like, is it just like the process you said you have helps, or?
Yeah, so definitely how I juggle the two is through scheduling. I mean, obviously, again, the business day from Monday to Friday is fairly well blocked off. So I try to make sure that on weeknights, Monday through Thursday, I try to make sure essentially between that 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. window, I try to make sure that I have an hour and a half of writing sometime in there. And I do try to start it at as close to the same time as possible each night, around 8 o'clock or so is what I try to do. And I feel like getting in that regular rhythm, you're definitely training your brain to think like your brain is you essentially condition your brain to say, okay, it's writing time now. And starting that, but back when I started that, it was probably harder to always be productive because you'd get distractions. But if you force yourself into a rhythm and you educate your brain to think that way, that helps quite a bit. But to be honest, my most productive time, and I can be moderately productive on those weeknights. But candidly, you're at the end of the day. You probably had dinner. If it's me, I've probably had like a Deschutes Black Butte Porter or something, so I'm feeling a little sleepy. But I get it done. But my most productive time is I absolutely set aside Saturday and Sunday morning. I have probably, usually between 9 a.m. and noon is I'll get up, I'll make my coffee, and I'll write. And that's actually, I mean, in those 2 days, I'm probably just as productive as I am Monday through Thursday. Friday's my day off. I think that also helps as well too. You've kind of got to because I love writing, but it is work. And so just like anything else, you've got to give yourself time off. So Friday's my day off. So that regular rhythm is what helps me go forward. And I would admittedly go far as to say, my day job has probably in to a certain extent, right, like helped me be a better writer because there's those there's knowing that I don't need to worry about health insurance or retirement, knowing that all those are covered through a professional career, kind of frees your mind of maybe something that some factors that might otherwise, I guess for me, probably be potentially more anxiety inducing. Plus, I've got a very very supportive community there. Some of my first readers were my coworkers, and they're always great about letting me coordinate and take time off to go on to conventions. You and I met at Wizard World in New Orleans. I love visiting New Orleans. I try to make it there at least once a year. So in many ways, actually, the day job is actually an asset to the writing as well.
Yeah, I could definitely, see where you're coming from. Me, my schedule is basically 5 days a week, 2 days off, and but no, it's not consistent. Like I could have a Saturday off or a Wednesday off, it just depends. And my shifts
Sure.
usually run, they're the basic 9 to 5. So I have, evening time, and being, a younger with his own place, single guy, there's not really much to, I don't have, a family, any children, anything like that. I don't know if you
Right.
do or not, if that's, the case. Is that like, do you have like a family life? How do you adjust family life too? Or,
Nope, I'm a single bachelor here in rural North Dakota. It's good
right.
times.
I feel you. All right.
Yeah, so we're in the same boat there.
Well, I mean, I consider it when you're a writer, that can be a pretty much a good thing in a way to not, good and, bad. But
No, no, I'm right there with you. I mean, it's definitely, I mean, yeah, I mean, I definitely had, for example, and I value healthy relationships, but I did have a relationship where, yes, my partner in that relationship was not happy with the time I took to write, I guess. And that to me was a great lesson learned, because my relationship with her was important, but so was the writing. And that was a good, I was probably like 10 years younger or whatever, but that was a good life lesson for me, is that, finding the right life partner is someone, who can actually help, reinforce, reinforce that habit and support it. But vice versa, it's absolutely not one way. I would expect to 100% support her in all the things that she is passionate about too, because you have the relationship you're passionate about, but there's probably other things you're passionate about too, and it's important to support each other on that. So not to go down that sidetrack, but I think you're absolutely right. I think in some cases, in for example, an early relationship I had, it absolutely was a problem, but it doesn't have to be. So rate for the right one. I don't know. That's
Yeah.
that's my only talking points there.
Well, before this turns into a Dr. Phil episode,
That's
I'm
right.
gonna I'm gonna take it. So I plan on doing like the traditional route, the getting an agent, finding a publisher, that
Mhm.
traditional route. You did the self-publishing route, right?
Correct. Yes, I did.
Why did you choose the self-publishing route over the traditional route?
Sure. So I guess I looked at it like this. I do intend to query an agent someday, as well as an editor. My goal is to absolutely develop a traditional publishing contract. But what's cool about the independent publishing platform, and that's a platform that didn't really exist before too long ago, but it allows you essentially mechanisms by which you can go into and essentially become the publisher of your own book by tying the different pieces together, like editing and cover design. But my thought process was, soliciting agents, cold query, they generally get a lot of solicitations. So there has to be something in that solicitation that really makes that submission stand above everything else. And number one, the best thing to do that is have an excellently crafted submission, right? The piece that you send them, the chapter excerpt or whatever, should be written as magnificently as possible. But barring that, they still might get a lot of really good manuscripts. My thought process was that developing a publishing and a writing backlist to where I could show a track record of success, I thought to myself, I said, go out, publish books yourself, independently publish these books, and my goal is build a track record of success, build a readership following, show this is how book one performed, this is how book two performed, this is how book three performed, show, say, I've worked on building up a mailing list to X number of followers, and I've been able to leverage my website and social media presences as such. That's a real portfolio that I can bring to the table. And so my goal absolutely is to ultimately obtain a traditional publishing contract. But I felt that the way I could make myself stand out from the submissions was by building up and showing that I had a track record of success going into it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I did try the self-publishing once. I think when we met I showed you the
Yeah.
book I had self-published, which I took off and pulled because like I wasn't happy with the way it turned out, and
Right.
the stories were a bit, too dark for most audiences. So I didn't, it was, basically a good start, but I didn't want to have it on there. So,
There's
which
good use of language too in that work. I will say, when I was reading it, some good command of prose, I felt.
Yeah, and thank you. But so and that kind of since that I say that book didn't do well, that kind of leads me to a topic that I don't think no writer likes to talk about, but basically like criticism and failure. Has there been how do you deal with the criticism for your book, or how would you deal with like a book that if say it just totally bombed, didn't sell well, and got trashed by critics? What do you think's a way for writers to deal with that, and how would you deal with that?
Yeah, no, that's for me. For me, that's motivation to do it better the second time. And you get the criticism. There are some 1-star reviews of Warrior of Light on Amazon. That happens. I had one of my short stories Amazon. There was actually a 2-star review that and I've gotten more than one negative review, and most of them I brush off. The one I got for my short story on Amazon, probably the hardest one. It was a short story about a haunted house, and the review implied that the book involved teen suicide, which it absolutely does not. That does not happen in the short story whatsoever. If anything, it was a short story about how a high school student learns to ultimately confront a bully is where it goes. But when the story starts, he's in a negative situation. That one review is the only one that really got to me. The others, some of them are pretty funny. I go read it. There's a 1-star Warrior of Light on Goodreads. It makes me laugh every time I read it. To be honest, here's what I focus on. Every time that I get one of those bad reviews, I think about the fact that I was approached by a lady at a convention recently here when I had my second book out, and she had bought my first book the previous year, and she told me she was so excited to get my second book because she'd had a major back surgery previously, was in a lot of pain, and being able to read Warrior of Light was what helped her process that. I had a high school English teacher come up to me, and she said she had previously gotten a book of mine. There had been a student that she had been battling with, the faculty at the school had been battling with. They could not get him engaged in class. They could not get him to read. She got the student a copy of my book, and he loved it. And she and the teacher and that student, they finally connected. And you know what? Like any one of those experiences, like that would get me through 100 bad reviews. I mean, so I admittedly, because what you write's not going to be what you write's going to not be for everyone. There's books that other people have loved that I read that I didn't care much for. It's, to be honest, it's not a personal thing. People just have different tastes. So I try to what I do is I focus on a couple of the moments like I described there, and that's what gets me through it. Vice versa. What thoughts do you have for us on that topic?
I mean, like you said, there's always going to be mixed, reviews. I know when my novel comes out, not, of course, 100% people are going to love it, of course. And some of today's even most accomplished authors like Stephen King, he probably, of course, he gets negative reviews as well. So, but like you said, it's like you learn it and it makes you want to do better the second time. So, my first novel, the negative reviews that there are, I'll learn from those and, try it, again. As far as harsh criticism, I do have a story from high school I didn't do much writing, like I said, in high school, but I did write one short story. My teacher suggested putting it on a website called teenink.com.
So I heard of that.
Yeah, the story was about basically just 4 kids who go into the future to see what it's like to be adults. And so I put it on there and, got one comment. And the comment was, and I remember this exactly, "This is so bad. If I see you in real life, I'm going to punch you in the face." But I mean, now looking back, of course, I kind of have that story was terrible, of course, but I didn't know that at the time. So that one like kind of hit me like, geez, am I that bad of a writer, at this point, But like I said, I learned from that, of course, I think I've grown since then as a writer. But in general, as far as criticism, I think I definitely agree highly on what you said, at the beginning, that it just makes you want to do better the second time. So.
And there's no writer on the planet who has not gotten a bad review at some point in time. There'll be, J.K. Rowling, who sold more books than any other writer ever, except for the Bible. There's 1-star reviews on all of her books. I mean, it's a part of the process.
So now, as far as your characters go, what are the inspirations for your certain characters? Like, do you kind of give them the personality of real people, or are they all strictly just from your imagination?
Yeah, no, a lot of the that's a real good one, because I mean, fundamentally, all of the characters did number one come from my imagination. I would definitely say, there's certain cases where everyone's experiences in life to some extent ultimately have in influence on them. So there's definitely not any sort of characters that I would say, right, like this character is a stand-in for my brother, right, or this character is a stand-in for me. That sort of direct correlation, certainly not. But I think, for example, there was, I think there's probably maybe more specific types of situations. Like again, I guess I'll take an example of the day job. I do cybersecurity. I work for the private sector, but because of the nature of the work that cybersecurity entails, I also have a relationship with several law enforcement officers due to the professional subject matter of what I work on. And one of the law enforcement officers was he was teaching a course on workplace violence, right, and what people can do to be more what you would refer to as situational awareness, what people can do to alert themselves that they're in a unsafe situation. And at one point, he said, the difference between vigilance and paranoia is that vigilant people can still function, right? And that line, I was like, that line really connected with me. So eventually I had one of my characters in a book, for example, said that line. Does that character in that book have any other association with that law enforcement officer? Probably not at all. But there's probably specific use cases where I'm like, that would be good to kind of craft a story concept around that experience. What about in your case?
Um, I do name and go for appearance with people I've known. Like
Sure,
my main character's name is Mickey, which was my grandfather's name. So I
sure.
kind of, but he's not, anything like my grandfather. It was, so he's, got, tattoos. He's kind of like he grew up as like kind of this rebel, born in Vegas, came to Louisiana, that kind of thing, and but really, my inspiration for characters and, setting is, of course, I draw from, movies a lot and, television shows. Like that detective novel took place in Louisiana, the dark places in Louisiana, much like True Detective, the first season. And I think, I drew my main character, Mickey, not only naming him after my grandfather, but there was a movie with Ryan Gosling called A Place Beyond the Pines, which I don't know
Hmm.
if you've seen that film before, but very, very underrated, movie. But Ryan Gosling's character, I really, as far as appearance and personality wise, I did draw a lot from his character in that movie. So I definitely, if you want to get the gist of the character, that's definitely a good movie to watch.
Sure.
And the hardest part is, well, I say, is my story is told from two points of view. You see it from Mickey's point of view, but you also see it from his daughter Candace's point of view, which she's a 13-year-old girl. So
Hmm.
that's probably a challenge, of course, for me because I've never been a 13-year-old girl, as far as I know.
As far
But
as you know, yeah.
maybe in a former life, I don't know. But that's probably the toughest, part. But since my editor's, a woman, so that she kind of feeds, into that. And like I said, I watch, lots of movies that kind of help. There's a movie called 13 about 13-year-old girls, so I
Sure,
watched that film, and so that's kind of where I get my inspiration, for characters. So
sure.
yeah. So next, I thought before we close this up, I would do some rapid fire questions, kind of about writing, but and about us in general, because I
Sure,
feel like if an audience gets to know the writer, they'll know what to expect from their writing.
sure.
So, like question one we'll have is favorite book of all time. What is your favorite just book of all time that you could read over and over?
It by Stephen King.
It.
Yeah.
uh, that is definitely one of my favorites, but I think my favorite novel of all time is a novel called Galveston by Nick Pizzolatto, who the author Nick Pizzolatto is also the creator and writer of True Detective as well.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, definitely a very good novel. Now, what about a television show? What's your favorite television show of all time?
Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Good stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned it during this video, True Detective, well, and The Walking Dead as well. That's also,
Both solid shows.
yeah, both fantastic. What about a movie or movie trilogy franchise? Got a favorite movie?
Yeah. So favorite movie's got to be the Shawshank Redemption,
Yeah.
definitely. A franchise, no, but favorite movie be Shawshank Redemption.
For me, it's definitely I'm a big Star Wars nerd, and when I tell people that, they assume I write like sci-fi and that type of thing, which I totally write the complete opposite. But Star Wars, ever since I was a kid, that's definitely been my favorite, movie of all time. So now, what about like, do you listen to music when you write?
I do, yeah, absolutely.
What kind of like music do you like to listen to as you write?
And rapid fire questions, so I'll try to keep it rapid. But honestly, my tastes have evolved. But I've been listening to a lot of modern rock right now. So what you'll find on my playlist would be bands like Shinedown would be there, for example, Pop Evil, um, Skillet, uh, Breaking Benjamin. That's probably been what I've been listening to most recently.
Yeah, my response is probably going to be very rapid because I write, I'm always curious to see if writers do listen to music because I can't have like anything in the background.
Oh,
It's just,
really?
yeah,
For
like
me, it helps a ton. It goes a long way for me.
I listen to music before I start writing, like to kind of get in that mindset, So you'll find a lot of Nickelback on my playlist.
Sure.
So, and but yeah, as far as when I'm writing, it's just complete silence, like not a single sound. So I find that, I always find writers say they listen to classical or, movie soundtracks or anything. Has there ever been like a movie soundtrack that you listen to?
Lord of the Rings movie soundtracks are awesome, as is the soundtrack for Gladiator.
So now, I mean, I say ask your favorite novel. What's a novel you wish you would have written?
I can't say it again. I can't rehash that. But think about this here. I would say probably what comes to mind. I used to have an answer for this, and now it's I'm totally blanking on it for some reason. Let's go with The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. It was the first installment in the Wheel of Time, probably which for those who are not familiar, the Wheel of Time was probably the best selling epic fantasy series in the 1990s and 2000s, and completely changed the perception of whether or not like fantasy, especially like doorstopper fantasies, and when I say doorstopper, I mean it was like 600 pages. Um, Normally publishers don't like books of that length because they cost more to produce, and it's therefore harder for them to make money on them. Robert Jordan was making money off of gigantically thick fantasy books, and that changed how the publishing industry viewed epic fantasy. People will there's a lot of people after the fact that'll kind of razz Robert Jordan for maybe the quality of his prose or his portrayal of female characters. And I'm not going to say that not all of those criticisms aren't justified. There are some valid criticisms, but he was without a doubt, and that's why I picked The Eye of the World. He was absolutely without a doubt one of the most influential fantasy writers of this century.
Yeah, I'd have to. I have heard, of the writer. I've never really read any of his work though. But as far as me, it's gonna. I mean, a lot of people, everybody knows this book that I'm about to say because I don't want to, like you said, Galveston. Of course, I would have loved to have written that. But another one, and probably the most popular novel in the world, The Great Gatsby.
Oh, great pick. Your pick is way better than mine. I really struggle with that one. Good
That
answer.
that because that's a book that basically like changed history, like everything in the 20s, and still today people have parties, and the
Hmm.
successful movie franchise just basically, just went down in history. I think that would have been an amazing book, to write. A lot of people don't like it because they were forced to read it in school, and
Hmm.
I think that's why I love it so much because I didn't have to read it, in school. I read it on my own, and a book you read on your own is much better than one you're forced to read, of course,
Always true.
which is part of the reason I do not like 1984 by George Orwell.
Good,
I,
good answer.
I got an F on that research paper, so I don't like to go back to that.
Hey, you're sticking it to your teacher. You're publishing books and they're not. So there you go.
So, and now, as far as a book you wish you'd written, what's a movie to book adaptation that you wish you could have changed? Like, what's one that you didn't think did justice to the book, but like if you wrote it, you think you could have done better? What's one of those?
The Bourne Identity, which is crazy because the Jason Bourne trilogy with Matt Damon was a very it was a very successful trilogy. It was received critically and commercially, but Robert Ludlum, the writer of the Bourne Identity, is a master of the spy thriller, and the film adaptation of the Bourne Identity. The only thing that it has in common with the book is that the main character's name is Jason Bourne, or his fake name is Jason Bourne, and it starts on a boat. There are absolutely no similarities beyond that. Oh, and he's trying to regain his memory, but who he was is actually a completely different person. The What's cool about Robert Ludlum is that he always peels back the layer of the onion one layer deeper, and suffice it to say that who he finds out he is in the movie, The Bourne Identity, is actually only like one step in that layer. There's actually further revelations about who he really is beyond that, and admittedly, maybe that's hard to portray in film. And I'm certainly not going to advocate for the fact that a film has to match the book scene for scene, because I don't think good adaptations do that anyway. They certainly could have changed things, but the fundamental nature of the story changed, and it was in my opinion it was a disservice to probably the greatest spy thriller writer, again of pretty close to all time.
Yeah, I believe for me, it's definitely probably actually a recent film book to film adaptation that came out, the Snowman. I don't know if you.
Oh yeah, I didn't
Yeah,
realize that was based off a book.
yeah. It was a book by Joe Nesbo, and I read the book. The book is fantastic. It's part of a detective series, the Harry Hole series, and the movie was with Michael Fassbender, and the movie was god awful.
I think its
Just,
Rotten Tomatoes was pretty low, if I remember.
I remember seeing. I think it was like 8%. Like,
Yeah, it was pretty low.
yeah, I wish like I could rewrite it or just have someone rewrite it. Just the whole film in general, like, did not do the book justice at all. So I think they, ruined what could have been like a successful like franchise of movies, kind of like the Bourne Identity films, like we could have had. But now it's like I don't want another Harry Hole movie book adaptation because I'm too scared now. What they do to it. Um, so that's our last rapid fire question. I'm gonna basically close with future projects. Is there anything you could tell us about upcoming projects you have, or are we getting a third book from
We
you?
are. Yes. So I guess I'll tell you two things. One, so Warrior of Light, City of Darkness, standalone books. So I'm working on a third book that for this foreseeable future probably will be probably the last book that I write with those characters. So I'm working on that. But then what I'm going to start telling people is those each of those books. Those books, I consider them just practice. They're good. I hope they're well received. I absolutely want to promote the heck out of them, but those are just practice. After that, there's going to be something pretty crazy coming up, and that's all I have to say.
Yeah, well, for me, I've said it. My novel Gone Before the Storm, my first debut is in the works now. It'll probably, I wish I could say, oh, in a couple months it'll be out, but fortunately, that's something, you can't, tell unless, I would have, if I took the traditional publishing, I mean, the self-publishing route, I probably could tell you when it would come out, but hopefully, I hope to, by the fall to be in the submission process. I'll say that. But as far as, something to be self-published, this kind of goes back to learning from criticism due to the fact that my other one I wasn't happy with and didn't do well with. I am currently working on another short book of short stories that I want to, try self-publishing again. And, I'm trying to kind of double up with that short story book and then my novel, of course, as well. But I do hope to have that short story book done very soon, which maybe I could get your help this time to do it right through Amazon. Because
Absolutely. By all means, I'll reach out to me and I'll show you what I know of the trade.
and hey, maybe we could combine a thriller and a fantasy story and combine do a collaboration.
Ready? I'm all about it. So yeah, let's talk about that.
After this interview, that's what the people are gonna want.
Yeah, they'll want a joint project.
We've had two amazing minds with this interview, two totally different genres, but I still find it's pretty, good how much writers still have in common despite how different their genres are.
Yeah, the craft the craft in a lot of ways is still the same. The nature of the nature of the story might vary, but the craft of building it and promoting it, there's a lot of similarities there.
Well, William, I want to thank you for doing this interview with me and kind of giving the people your perspective on writing and telling us about, your projects, what you have coming up. I'm sure, hopefully, you'll definitely, I have a feeling you'll definitely get some more fans after, this video for sure. I have read Warrior of Light because I picked up a copy at the, and it's definitely one of the, great fantasy novels. And I don't read fantasy very often, but I will say this is definitely a great one to read.
I appreciate hearing that. Thank you for the feedback.
So thank you, of course, and thanks for having the conversation. And maybe in the future we'll have to stay updated on what you're doing, your books, and we'll have to do a part two.
Yeah, I'll be down in New Orleans next year at Wizard World. So I never miss a this is gonna be a tourist thing, but I never miss an opportunity to get some beignets. So I'll be I'll be back down. I'll be back down there in January, hopefully.
Well, thanks again, William, and I be in touch and hope to talk to you again soon.
All right, we'll talk later. Thank you, Jordan.
All right.